The first time I smelled another man on my wife, I was standing in our kitchen, flipping pancakes for the kids. Yeah, pancakes. That's how normal life was at that point, just an average Saturday morning, kids arguing over syrup, coffee brewing, and Emma walking in late from her morning run. Only this time, she didn't smell like sweat or the faint perfume of the flowers she passed on her route. She smelled like him. Like someone else. Like cologne I'd never worn. She kissed me on the cheek as she walked by, muttering something about how she had to take a quick shower before meeting her friend for brunch. I remember the exact moment her lips touched my skin. It felt colder than it should have, wrong in a way I couldn't explain. And that smell? That cologne stuck to her like a red flag I couldn't ignore. I stood there, spatula in hand, watching her disappear up the stairs, and for a few seconds, I convinced myself I was crazy. Maybe she brushed past someone in the park? Maybe I was imagining things? I mean, we'd been married for 10 years, had 2 kids, a mortgage, and the kind of life that seemed impossible to break. But then, my gut twisted, and that little voice in the back of my head, the one I'd been ignoring for months, suddenly screamed louder than ever. I was done ignoring it. The second she was out of the house, I decided to act. Not by going through her phone or checking some sleazy text message. I had to get smarter than that. This wasn't some teenage affair with emojis and winks. If Emma was stepping out on me, she'd cover her tracks better than that. No, I had a better plan, one that would let me see just how deep her betrayal ran. I made a quick call to a friend I knew I could count on. A guy from work who owed me a favor, one of those favors you don't talk about. He had a skill set that didn't involve computers or paperwork. No, this was something much more old school, something a little darker, but I needed the truth, and I wasn't going to play it soft. I wasn't going to catch Emma in a lie with texts or whispers. I was going to follow her, or more accurately, I was going to have her followed. I don't think there's a clean way to find out your wife's cheating on you. There's no good version of that moment where the world tilts, and everything you thought was solid suddenly isn't. That said, I wasn't about to wait around for Emma to hand me the truth. She wasn't going to stumble into some confession over dinner one night or break down in tears about how she'd made a mistake. No, if I wanted to know what was really happening, I was going to have to drag it out myself. The guy I called, his name was Derek. He's not the kind of friend you introduce at family barbecues or bring over for a Sunday beer while the game's on. He's the guy you keep in the background, a tool you use when you need someone to get their hands dirty. I'd done him a favor years back, helped him cover up something messy at work that could have cost him his career. He owed me, and this was the time to cash in. It took less than 2 days before Derek had her routine mapped out. Every morning, like clockwork, Emma went for her run. I never questioned it because, well, why would I? She was fit, active, always cared about her health, and it seemed normal enough. But what Derek saw wasn't normal. She wasn't jogging the neighborhood trails or working up a sweat at the gym. No, she was driving. A quick 10-minute car ride to a spot I'd never heard of, a residential building across town, tucked away where no one would think twice about her car parked out front. For the first couple of days, Derek followed her in the mornings, snapping photos of her walking into the building, and then 2 hours later, walking out, like it was a goddamn appointment. She'd come back home, fresh and smiling, straight into the shower, washing off whatever she didn't want me to smell. I knew where this was going, but I wasn't ready to see it yet. I needed more. More than just the obvious signs, more than the suspicion clawing at my chest. I needed to see her with him. By the 4th day, Derek had what I needed. He didn't give me all the details over the phone, just told me to meet him at his place. So, there I was, sitting in his rundown apartment, staring at the screen as he laid out the evidence. Picture after picture, timestamped, detailed Emma walking into that building, meeting him. The guy wasn't much to look at. Mid-30s, average build, dressed casually like some tech bro who spent his day in cafes with a laptop, pretending to be important. But there they were, her hand on his arm, their bodies too close for it to be innocent. They didn't kiss in the photos, didn't need to. You could see it in how they stood together, how comfortable she was with him. This wasn't new. And then came the final picture, the one that broke it all. Her standing outside his car, late at night. I knew that car. She'd mentioned it once, saying it belonged to someone she worked with. Someone she had a meeting with late one evening when she had to stay after hours. The guy she'd been talking about was right there in front of me. That's when it hit me like a punch to the gut. I recognized him from a company event last year. He was one of the partners at her firm. Someone I'd shaken hands with, someone I'd smiled at, someone who knew me by name. "You want more?" Derek asked, leaning back in his chair. "I can get more. Get audio, video, whatever you need to nail her." I couldn't answer him right away. My mouth was dry, and my thoughts were a tangled mess of anger, humiliation, and confusion. "No," I finally said. "I've seen enough." But that was a lie, wasn't it? Because the moment I left Derek's place, I needed to see it for myself. There's something about a betrayal that makes you doubt even the clearest evidence. You can have all the facts, all the photos, all the proof, but until you witness it with your own eyes, there's still that small, desperate part of you that clings to the hope that maybe, just maybe, it's not real. That this isn't your life falling apart. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I called in sick, told them I had some stomach bug and that I'd be back by the weekend. I parked a few blocks from the building, out of sight but close enough to see the front entrance. I sat there for what felt like hours, watching cars come and go, watching people on their way to work or school or wherever they needed to be, living their normal lives while mine was about to implode. And then I saw her. Emma's car pulled up just like Derek said it would, and she got out, looking around like she was checking to see if anyone was watching. She didn't see me, and why would she? I'd never been this guy before. The one who followed his wife, who played detective in his own marriage. I used to think that kind of thing happened to other people, the ones who didn't communicate, who didn't love each other enough to stay faithful. But there I was, proving to myself just how wrong I'd been. I watched her walk inside, wearing the same bright running shoes she always wore when she left for her jogs. I waited another 10 minutes, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing, 1,000 thoughts fighting for attention. What would I do when I saw them together? What would I say? Would I even say anything? Or would I just leave and never come back? But I had to see it. I couldn't leave without knowing for sure, without that image burned into my memory, the one that would justify everything I was about to do next. I got out of the car, locked it, and started walking toward the building. The front door was open, and I slipped inside without anyone noticing. The hallway was quiet, a faint hum from the elevator the only sound. I took the stairs instead. My heart was pounding, each step a reminder that I was about to witness something that would change everything. Floor by floor, I climbed, trying to remember which one Derek had mentioned. 3rd floor. Apartment 304. I stopped outside the door, staring at the brass numbers for a long time. There was nothing remarkable about it. Just a door, like any other door. But on the other side was the end of my marriage. I could hear voices inside, faint but unmistakable. Emma's voice, laughing, mixed with his. They were talking about something casual, something normal, like they were just two people enjoying their morning together. It was that normalcy that made me want to break the door down, that casual laughter that drove a knife through my chest. I knocked. Once. Twice. The laughter stopped. A few seconds passed, then footsteps. The door opened just a crack, and there he was. His face was blank, like he was trying to figure out who I was and why I was standing there. "Is Emma here?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. He blinked, and then the recognition hit him. His eyes widened slightly, but before he could react, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Emma was standing in the living room, frozen, her face drained of all color. She didn't need to say anything. The look on her face told me everything I needed to know. For a moment, none of us moved. The silence was thick, like we were all waiting for someone to make the first move, to break the tension that hung in the air. I looked at her, and then back at him. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. This wasn't a conversation anymore. This was war. Without a word, I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. When I got home, the house felt wrong, like it wasn't mine anymore. The walls, the photos, the furniture, they all mocked me, reminders of a life I thought I had control over. I couldn't just sit there in silence, couldn't just wait for Emma to come home like nothing had happened. There was no going back from what I'd just seen. So, I decided to get ahead of it. I called her. The phone rang a few times before she picked up, her voice calm, like she hadn't just been caught in someone else's apartment an hour earlier. "Hey," she said, as if nothing was wrong. "What's up?" I didn't answer right away. I was too busy trying to control the rage building inside me. Finally, I said, "We need to talk. Now." There was a pause. "Okay. I'll be home soon," she replied, her tone slightly different now, as if she sensed something was off. "No. Not here. I'm not waiting." "Meet me at the park, the one by the school," I said, already grabbing my keys and heading for the door. "The park?" she asked, confused. "Why?" "You'll find out when you get there." I hung up before she could argue. I drove fast, my mind racing faster. Every time I thought about what I'd seen in that apartment, my blood boiled. The casual way they had been laughing together, like I was some fool living a lie. And maybe I had been, but that was over now. I wasn't the type to wait around and let this play out on her terms. She'd already taken that choice away from me the moment she walked into another man's arms. By the time I got to the park, the sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the playground. It was deserted, just the way I wanted it. I parked the car and waited, staring at the swing swaying gently in the breeze, trying to keep my anger in check. 10 minutes later, Emma's car pulled up. She got out slowly, her face tense, trying to read me from a distance. She walked over, stopping a few feet away, arms crossed over her chest. She didn't say anything, just stood there waiting for me to make the first move. "You want to tell me what's going on?" I asked, my voice low, but I could feel the edge in it. Her eyes flickered with something, nervousness, maybe guilt, but she tried to play it cool. "What do you mean?" I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe she was still trying to dance around this. "You know exactly what I mean, Emma. I saw you. I went to that apartment. I saw everything." Her face drained of color, just like it had in that apartment, and for a second, I thought she was going to break down. But she didn't. Instead, she stood there, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find the right excuse. Like there was anything she could say that would fix this. You followed me," she finally asked, her voice shaky. "I had someone follow you," I corrected. "You think I haven't noticed the late nights, the bullshit excuses? You think I wouldn't figure it out?" Emma looked away, her eyes scanning the ground like it might offer her some kind of escape. "It's not what you think," she muttered. That sentence. That pathetic, overused defense. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't about to lose control, not yet. "So, you're not fucking him?" I asked bluntly, watching her flinch at the words. She hesitated, and that was all I needed. I already knew the answer. She didn't have to say it, but I wanted to hear her admit it. I wanted the truth from her mouth, even if it cut me deeper than anything else. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I mean, we didn't." "Don't lie to me, Emma," I snapped, cutting her off. "I saw you. I saw the way you looked at him, the way you touched him. You're really gonna stand here and tell me it's nothing?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't falling for that. "Not this time." "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen." "A mistake?" I repeated, taking a step toward her. "You've been seeing him for months." "Months, Emma. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Every time you met him, every time you lied to me, you made a choice." She was crying now, but I didn't care. I wasn't in the mood for her tears. She'd had her chance to be honest, to fix whatever was wrong between us, and she chose to screw around behind my back instead. I never wanted to hurt you, she choked out, wiping her face with the back of her hand. I don't know why it happened. I felt lost, and he was there. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. So, what? You felt lost, so you jumped into bed with the first guy who paid attention to you? That's your excuse? She didn't answer right away. Her silence said everything. I'm so fucking stupid, I muttered, shaking my head. I trusted you. I believed in us. I thought we had something real, but all this time, you've been lying to me. Emma tried to take a step closer, reaching for my arm, but I pulled away, the disgust and anger rising inside me again. Don't, I said, my voice cold. Don't touch me. Please, she begged, her voice shaking with desperation now. I'll do anything. We can fix this. I know I messed up, but I don't want to lose you. We can go to therapy, we can. Therapy? I scoffed. You think sitting in a room and talking about our feelings is going to fix what you've done? You betrayed me, Emma. You destroyed everything we had. She broke down then, her whole body shaking with sobs. It was pathetic, really, watching her crumble like that. Maybe before, I would have felt sorry for her, maybe even tried to comfort her, but not now. Not after what I'd seen. We were happy, I continued, my voice cold and distant. We had a good life. The kids, they're going to hate you for this. At the mention of our children, she sobbed harder, covering her face with her hands. Please, she whimpered, don't say that. Don't make it about them. This was between us. We can figure this out. No, you did this, I said, pointing at her. You don't get to stand there and act like this is some mutual problem we need to work through. You cheated, Emma. You fucked around behind my back, and now you're begging me to save you from it? She dropped to her knees in front of me, grabbing at my jeans like she was trying to anchor herself to me, like I was the last solid thing in her life. It was pathetic, and it made my stomach turn. Please, she cried, please, don't leave me. I'm sorry. I'll do anything, I swear. Just, don't go. I looked down at her, this woman I had loved for so many years, this woman I thought I knew. And I realized, in that moment, that I felt nothing for her. No sympathy, no pity. Just cold, hard anger. I don't even know who you are anymore, I said quietly, pulling away from her grasp and stepping back. And I don't want to. She stayed there, sobbing into the dirt, while I turned and walked back to my car, leaving her behind. When I got back to the house, it felt like the walls were closing in. Every corner of the place held memories, good ones I didn't want to think about anymore. This home we'd built together now felt like a goddamn lie. The pictures on the walls of our wedding day, the kids' school photos, the furniture we picked out as a couple, all of it was tainted by what she'd done. I wasn't going to live in this lie anymore. If she thought she could cry her way back into my good graces, she had no idea what was coming. Sitting in my office, staring at the pile of bills, I realized something. Emma had been careless, sloppy even. She never really thought I'd catch on. I bet she thought I was too comfortable, too predictable, to even suspect. That's what made this whole thing worse, she thought she could get away with it. Well, she was wrong. I was going to make sure she paid for every second of it. First, I needed to play it smart. Losing my temper or going for some dramatic blowout wouldn't give me what I wanted. This wasn't about me feeling better. It wasn't about just confronting her and watching her squirm, though that had its appeal. No, I wanted to burn it all down, piece by piece, just like she'd burned down our marriage. And I wanted her to know that I was the one holding the match. That night, after the confrontation at the park, she came home late. I could hear her moving around downstairs, probably trying to figure out what her next move was. Cry some more? Try to talk to me again? Apologize for the millionth time? I didn't care. I went to bed without saying a word, locking the door behind me. By morning, I had a plan. It started small. Subtle things. I took her phone while she was in the shower and forwarded every email she'd ever sent to her lover to my personal account. There wasn't much that wasn't already obvious, but there were a few details in there I could use. Little things she probably thought didn't matter but gave me all the leverage I needed. One email confirmed she'd used our joint credit card to book a hotel for one of their little meetups. I flagged that one. Next, I started collecting everything I could find on our finances. She handled most of it, but I had access too. I knew how to get into the accounts, knew where the money went. We had joint savings, but there were a few personal accounts she'd kept separate for herself, one she opened when she started her job at the firm. I didn't care about the details, but I needed the numbers. By the end of that week, I had it all: emails, financial statements, screenshots of messages, the whole mess. I didn't need to confront her again. I didn't need her to explain herself anymore. I was done listening to her lies. Now it was time to move forward. Step 1 was the house. We had a joint mortgage, and I knew exactly how much was left to pay. But I also knew Emma wouldn't be able to handle the payments on her own. The job she had at the firm wasn't enough to cover the bills. She needed me to keep the lights on. So, I did what any rational man would do. I stopped paying. I let the mortgage sit there, unpaid, for a full month without her knowing. The second month, she started to get letters. I knew because I intercepted them. Tossed them right in the trash before she had a chance to see them. It wouldn't be long before she noticed something was off, but by then, I'd be gone. I wasn't going to keep this house. Let her deal with the fallout. Let her try and explain to the bank why she couldn't afford the mortgage anymore. Next, I moved on to the car. It was in her name, technically, but I'd been the one making the payments since day one. We bought it right after our first kid was born, a safe, family car. Another reminder of the life we'd built, and another thing I was about to tear down. I stopped those payments too. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. If she wanted to keep living the life she'd so carefully crafted, she was going to have to fight for it. And I knew Emma, she wasn't a fighter. Not when things got hard. Step 3 was the kids. Now, I wasn't going to screw them over just to get back at her. They were innocent in all this. But I also wasn't going to let her keep using them as a shield, pretending like she was the perfect mother while she snuck around behind my back. So, I started making plans. I spoke to my lawyer, one I'd already hired when I first suspected the affair, and got the ball rolling on custody arrangements. I wanted full custody. I wanted to be the one in control, not her. I documented everything. The late nights, the mornings she was too hungover to get up and make breakfast, the days she claimed she had work meetings and missed school events. Every little thing went into a file, and I made sure it was solid. I wasn't going to let her get off easy. Not after what she'd done to me, to our family. The final part of my plan was the hardest to pull off, but it would be the most satisfying. I took all the evidence I had to the emails, the financial records, everything, and sent it to the HR department at her job. You see, the guy she was screwing around with wasn't just some random colleague. He was her boss. A partner at the firm. And while Emma might have thought she was in the clear, the firm had a strict policy against relationships between employees and management. Especially when one of those employees was married, and the affair was public knowledge. I waited for the fallout. And when it came, it was glorious. She got the call a few days later. I could tell something was wrong when she came home from work. Her face was pale, and she wasn't crying this time. She was too stunned for that. She sat down at the kitchen table, head in her hands, and didn't say a word. I watched her for a few minutes, waiting to see if she'd explain herself, if she'd tell me what had happened. But she didn't. She didn't need to. I already knew. Got fired, didn't you? I said, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. Her head snapped up, and she looked at me with wide, shocked eyes. How did you? I cut her off before she could finish. I know everything, Emma. Everything. You think I didn't see this coming? Tears welled up in her eyes again, but this time they weren't from guilt. They were from fear. Fear of what was coming next. Fear of how her life was unraveling in front of her, and she had no way to stop it. They know about you and him, I continued, my voice calm, almost casual. They know about the affair. HR got the whole file, emails, messages, receipts. You're done. She didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at me like she didn't know who I was anymore. But that was the thing, I wasn't the same man she'd married. I was someone else now. Someone colder, harder, someone who wasn't going to be pushed around anymore. I'll be out of here by the end of the week, I said, pushing off the counter and heading toward the stairs. The divorce papers are in the mail. I'll take the kids with me. Don't bother trying to fight it. She opened her mouth to say something, maybe to protest, maybe to beg, but I didn't care. I was done listening to her. This wasn't her story anymore. This was mine. Over the next few days, I packed my things, bit by bit, moving everything I needed into the small apartment I'd rented downtown. The kids didn't understand at first, but they would. They would see that I was the one who stayed, the one who kept things together. Emma? She was the one who broke it all. The last day I spent in the house was surreal. The furniture looked smaller, the rooms emptier. This place that had once felt so full of life now felt like a graveyard. I left my keys on the kitchen table, took one last look around, and walked out without a second thought. By the time Emma realized how far I'd gone, how deep my revenge had cut, it would be too late for her to do anything about it. She'd lose the house, the car, her job. And I'd take the kids, leaving her with nothing but the mess she'd created. She thought she could cheat and get away with it. She thought she could destroy our family and come out on top. She was wrong. I thought the hardest part was over once I had moved out. The house, the mortgage, the car payments, all of that was behind me now. Emma could deal with that mess. The kids had settled into a routine with me at the apartment, and while it wasn't perfect, it was better than the chaos I left behind. But there was one last thing I needed to deal with. One final, unavoidable conversation. The divorce was still in progress, the paperwork crawling its way through the legal system. I was fine with that. I had time, and I knew where this was going. Emma was scrambling to keep up, but I had everything planned out. What I didn't plan for was her calling me, asking to meet, and sounding more desperate than she ever had before. She wanted to talk, really talk. Not the half-assed excuses, not the weak apologies, but a real conversation. And part of me wanted to tell her to go to hell, to let her wallow in the mess she'd created. But the other part of me, the part that still remembered our life before all this, was curious. Curious to see what she could possibly say now. So, I agreed. We met at a diner on the edge of town, one of those places we used to go to when we were dating. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I wasn't about to let that sway my resolve. When I got there, she was already sitting in a booth, staring blankly into a cup of coffee. She looked tired. More than tired, actually, she looked broken. Her hair was a mess, her clothes rumpled like she hadn't bothered to get dressed properly for days. This wasn't the Emma I'd known. She used to be so put together, always looking her best, always presenting herself like she had everything under control. Now, she looked like someone whose world had crumbled beneath her feet, and that was exactly what had happened. I sat down across from her without saying a word. She glanced up, her eyes red and puffy, like she'd been crying for hours. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. I couldn't afford to. "Thanks for meeting me," she mumbled, barely looking at me. I nodded but didn't reply. I wasn't here to make small talk. I wanted to know what she had to say, what possible reason she could have for dragging this out any longer. "I know you don't want to hear it, but..." "I'm sorry," she started, her voice shaky. "I've said it before, but I mean it. I'm really, really sorry, Jake. I know I messed everything up, and I know you hate me for it." I sat back in the booth, crossing my arms over my chest. "Hate's a strong word," I said coldly. "I don't hate you. I'm just done with you." Her face twisted in pain at that, and for a moment, I saw the old Emma, the one who used to smile at me from across the room, the one who made me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. But that version of her was gone, buried under layers of lies and betrayal. I never wanted this, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I never wanted to hurt you or the kids. I don't know what happened. I don't even know why I did it. You don't know? I raised an eyebrow, my voice dripping with disbelief. You don't know why you cheated on me for months? Why you lied to my face every day? Come on, Emma. Don't insult me with that bullshit. She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to sugarcoat this. I wasn't going to make it easier for her. I know it sounds like an excuse, she said quickly, her hands trembling as she gripped the coffee cup. And maybe it is, but I just felt lost. I was scared. I didn't feel like myself anymore, and then he made me feel something again, like I was worth something. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep the anger from boiling over. And what about me, huh? What about your husband? The father of your kids? Was I just some obstacle in the way of your little midlife crisis? No. She protested, tears spilling down her cheeks. It wasn't like that. I loved you, Jake. I still love you. But I was so confused, and I made the worst mistake of my life. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. Yeah, you did. And now, you've got to live with it. Because there's no going back. You know that, right? There's no fixing this. We're done. She started crying harder, her whole body shaking with sobs, but I wasn't moved. I had heard it all before. The tears, the apologies, the excuses. It didn't change what she'd done. It didn't change the fact that she had destroyed everything we had, and for what? A fling? Some brief moment of excitement? Was that worth our family? I don't know what to do, she whispered, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I've lost everything. My job, the house, you, the kids. I don't know how to fix it. I shook my head slowly, leaning back in the booth again. You can't fix it, Emma. That's the point. You can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to the way it was. You made your choice, and now you're dealing with the consequences. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. But can't we at least try? For the kids? I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. For the kids? You think staying in a marriage where I can't trust you, or I can't even look at you without seeing him, is going to help the kids? No, Emma. I'm not going to do that. They deserve better than watching us pretend to be a happy family when we're not. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. You should have thought about the kids before you started screwing around with your boss. Don't come to me now, pretending like you care about them more than you care about yourself. Her face crumpled, and she broke down again, sobbing into her hands. I just sat there, watching her, feeling nothing but a cold detachment. I had loved her once, sure. But that love was gone. It had died the moment I found out about the affair. Now, all I felt was the need to move on, to get as far away from this mess as possible. What do you want from me, Emma? I asked after a few minutes of silence. What is it you think I can do for you now? She didn't answer right away. She just sat there, staring down at the table, her shoulders shaking as she tried to compose herself. Finally, she looked up, her eyes red and swollen, and whispered, I don't know. I guess. I just wanted to hear you say you don't hate me. I let out a long breath, running a hand through my hair. I told you, I don't hate you. But I can't forgive you either. And I can't stay with you. That's just the way it is. She nodded slowly, wiping her face again. I understand. We sat there in silence for a while, the tension thick in the air. The waitress came by and refilled our coffee, giving us a sympathetic look before walking away. Emma didn't touch her cup. She just sat there, staring at it, like she was trying to find the words to say something, anything, that would make this easier. But there was nothing left to say. We both knew that. I'm moving forward with the divorce, I said finally, breaking the silence. I'll make sure the kids are taken care of, but I'm not going to fight for anything else. You can keep whatever's left of the house, the car. I don't care. I just want this over with. Her eyes widened in surprise. You're not going to fight me on custody? I shook my head. I'm not that kind of guy, Emma. The kids need you, even if you fucked up. But if you screw up again, if I see any signs of you falling apart, I won't hesitate to take full custody. Don't make me regret giving you this chance. She swallowed hard, nodding. I won't. I promise. We sat there for a few more minutes, the weight of everything hanging between us. There was no love left, no affection, just a cold understanding that this was the end. Finally, I stood up, tossing some money on the table for the coffee. I'll see you at the lawyer's office, I said, turning to leave. Jake, wait, she called out, her voice trembling. I paused, glancing back at her. I'm sorry, she whispered again, her voice breaking. For everything. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and walked out of the diner, leaving her behind, just like I'd left everything else behind. And for the first time in months, I felt free. The weight of it all didn't really hit me until the day the divorce was finalized. I thought I'd feel different, relieved, maybe even satisfied, like I'd won something after everything Emma put me through. But when I walked out of that courthouse with the official papers in my hand, all I felt was emptiness. This wasn't a victory. There were no winners here, just two broken people standing on opposite sides of a battlefield neither of us had planned for. The kids were at school when I got home. The apartment was quiet, and for a moment, I just stood there in the living room, looking around at the life I had now. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The pictures on the wall were mostly of the kids, Sarah and Josh at their last soccer game, Sarah's birthday party, Josh making some ridiculous face with his missing front teeth. No pictures of Emma. I had taken those down months ago, stuffed them in a box and shoved it into the back of the closet. I didn't need to look at them anymore. But even without the pictures, she was still there, lingering in every corner of my mind. Every time I saw the kids, I saw her. Every time I dropped them off for her weekend, I had to stand there and pretend like I didn't want to scream at her, ask her why she did it, why she threw everything away. But what would be the point? We were past that. The divorce was just a piece of paper, a formality. The real damage had been done long before that. I sat down on the couch, tossing the divorce papers onto the coffee table, and let out a long breath. The silence was suffocating. I'd gotten used to it over the past few months, living alone, spending most nights in front of the TV, the kids' laughter echoing in my head long after they'd gone to bed or back to Emma's for the weekend. It was the kind of silence that made you think too much, replay everything in your head until you couldn't stand it anymore. I'd spent so much time being angry at Emma for what she'd done, angry at myself for not seeing it sooner, angry at how quickly our life had fallen apart. But now that it was all over, I realized that the anger wasn't doing me any good. It didn't fix anything. It didn't make the pain go away. It just kept me stuck in this cycle of bitterness, and I didn't want to be stuck anymore. I thought back to that last conversation we had at the diner, the way she looked when I told her it was over for good. The truth was, a part of me wanted to hate her. It would have been easier if I could have just written her off as a terrible person, as some villain in my story. But the reality was messier than that. Emma wasn't evil. She wasn't some heartless monster who set out to destroy our family. She was flawed, like I was, like anyone. She made a choice, a selfish, destructive choice, but she didn't deserve my hate. And I was tired of carrying it around. I picked up my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found her name. I hadn't spoken to her outside of texts about the kids in weeks. Part of me was still too raw from everything that had happened. But I couldn't keep ignoring it. We had to figure out how to coexist, how to raise our kids without tearing each other apart in the process. I dialed her number, and after a few rings, she picked up. Jake? She answered, her voice tentative, like she wasn't sure if I'd called by mistake. Yeah, it's me, I said, leaning back on the couch. Listen, I wanted to talk. Not about the kids, just about everything. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, could almost picture the way she was biting her lip, trying to figure out what to say. "I'm listening," she said quietly. I closed my eyes, trying to gather my thoughts. "I'm not calling to argue, or to rehash all the shit that happened. I've been thinking a lot. About us. About how things went down." She stayed quiet, waiting for me to continue. "I've been angry for a long time, Emma. And I think that was easier than dealing with how much it hurt. But the anger's not doing me any good anymore. I don't want to keep feeling like this." "I understand," she said softly. "I don't want that either." "I don't hate you," I admitted, the words coming out more easily than I expected. "I thought I did, for a while. But I don't. I can't. We've been through too much for me to feel that way. I'll never understand why you did what you did, but I don't want to keep holding it over your head." There was another long pause, and when she spoke again, I could hear the emotion in her voice. "I'm so sorry, Jake. I don't expect you to forgive me, but hearing you say that means more than you know. I never wanted to be the reason for your pain." "I know," I said, and surprisingly, I meant it. "But we can't go back. All we can do is try to move forward. And we need to do that for the kids. They deserve better than us dragging them through this mess." "You're right," she agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been trying to keep it together for them, but I know I haven't made it easy. I'll do better, Jake. I'll be better for them. We both need to be," I said firmly. "We can't change what happened, but we can control how we handle things going forward. I don't want them to feel like they have to choose between us. They need both of us, whether we're together or not." "I want that too," she said. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this work." We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of everything we'd been through hanging in the air. But this silence felt different, less oppressive, more like the calm after a storm. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was a start. "I don't know what the future looks like," I admitted. "But I do know that I'm ready to let go of all the anger. It's not going to be easy, but I want to try. For me. For the kids. And even for you." "I appreciate that," she whispered. "More than you know." I didn't say anything for a while, just let the moment sit there between us. I wasn't naive enough to think we'd ever be friends again, or that the pain would magically disappear. But I didn't need to hold on to it anymore. It wasn't serving me. It wasn't making me stronger. It was just keeping me from moving forward. Eventually, I sighed and rubbed the back of my neck. "All right. I think that's all I wanted to say." "Jake," she hesitated, then continued, "thank you. For calling. For saying that. I didn't expect it, but I'm glad you did." "Yeah," I replied, standing up and pacing the living room. "I'll see you when I drop the kids off tomorrow." "Okay," she said softly. "Good night." I hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, staring at the screen. There was no relief, no sudden wave of freedom or closure. Just acceptance. Maybe that's all I could expect. The next day, I took the kids to Emma's place. The divorce was still fresh in their minds, and I could see the confusion in their eyes every time I dropped them off. But this time felt different. This time, I didn't have that ball of resentment sitting in my chest. When I got to her house, she came to the door to greet the kids. I stayed back, giving them their space, but I could see the difference in her too. She didn't look as broken, as defeated. Maybe that conversation had helped her too, in a way. As I drove back to the apartment, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sitting in the car, replaying every detail of the affair, or thinking about what I'd lost. I wasn't wondering what could have been different. I was just, okay. Maybe not happy, not yet, but okay. And that was enough. For now, at least.